Welcome back. We continue our panel discussion ahead of Freedom Day and focusing on the question of whether we are dealing with a situation where many young South Africans will be feeling that they are unfree. All right, let me take the conversation to Dimpho Lekgeu. And Dimpho, just to take the conversation forward then a little bit, there's been this warning of a ticking time bomb in that, South Africa has this youthful bulge in its population. But given the complexities and the difficulties that we were talking about a few minutes ago, we're not taking advantage of that, leading to that being a ticking time bomb. To what extent is that materializing? Given the recent events that we have seen, the ready availability of a cohort of young people that can be recruited for all manner of instability and social ills.
Yeah. I think we keep calling it a ticking time bomb, but I think it's erupted. And I think it's erupted in particular communities. I think especially in marginalized communities, right?
Dimpho, my apologies. My team tells me that there's something that you need to fix with your positioning in terms of the camera. We'd like to have you on camera. So I think let's try and sort that out and then you can give it another go. I think it's good now. Yeah, so you can go for it.
Okay, yes. I was saying that I think that the bomb has definitely erupted, especially in marginalized communities. If you take a walk through your nearest township at 12 p.m. in the middle of the day, you're going to find a lot of young people kind of loitering around. And that tells you about how well or how much we failed, I think, to take advantage of the potential of young people in this country. But I also think that, this talk of a ticking time bomb can also be seen just looking at the quarterly labor force statistics that were released, I think, a month ago by Stats SA. 3.4 million young people are now within that needs category, which means that they're not in employment, they're not in any kind of education program, but they're also not in training. You have 7 out of young people, as we said at the beginning of the conversation, who are unable to find a job. But I also think it's important that we speak about I think a group of young people that we don't often talk about in these conversations, and those are young people who are pursuing entrepreneurship. Funding opportunities are becoming less and less available, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic. When you think about the number of businesses that are being led by young people that have had to shut down, that have, failed to kind of reinvigorate even after the pandemic, leaving so many people and so many families destitute. It's really concerning. And like you said, these economic challenges then spill over and create social issues as well, because you're able to deploy young people into things like you mentioned, like what we're seeing now happening with Operation Dudula in Johannesburg, but also into other violent social ills such as gangsterism and crimes in communities.
Mighty Jamie, to what extent are we starting to see a situation where many young South Africans feel that they don't have a stake in our democracy? And how perilous is that? And to what extent did the events of July last year, for example, signal that we are reaching that point?
Yeah, I think we are very much in the middle of, that kind of unrest. And if you recall, we've been talking about community unrest for many years now. Last year was an escalation of community unrest. Obviously, there were political machinations at work. But in reality, there's that saying that says an idle mind is the devil's workshop. And in this case, what we're seeing is idle minds, idle hands are the workshops of any forms of extremist populists and politicians. So even if it's the case of trying to rally up support for the ex-president Jacob Zuma, there was opportunity to do that. If it comes in the packaging of trying to rally up anti-African migrant sentiment, that's happening. So right now, the idle mind is Dudula's workshop. And the question that I think is coming to my mind is, why are we not opening up re-education opportunities for people who didn't do well the first time around when they were in high school? These people who dropped out, this 3.4 million that is not in employment, education or training, this 6 million youth that we're talking about who are also unemployed. what are we doing to proactively reintroduce them into the economy? Because in 2013, Uber arrived, and that changed transportation for a long time. Amazon is trying to establish themselves in Cape Town, and what that comes is with the establishment of fulfillment centers. That will come with the erosion of the retail market as we know it. What are we doing for the millions of people working in retail, the millions of people working in jobs that will be replaced progressively by technology? If we are not going back to the community saying, here are opportunities to give you something to do, to give you something to work towards, considering that you are currently excluded. And I think that point about entrepreneurs is very important, because if you look at Google, it now employs over 50,000 people, but it's a company that was established in the late 90s. If you look at Amazon, even if you look at what has been created by a South African, Elon Musk, 3 companies, he employs a lot of people, but he doesn't do it within South Africa, because as a young South African, he looked around and he didn't see the ecosystem to support the size of the dreams that he had. Now we need to think to ourselves, how do we create an ecosystem where the best and the most brilliant in South Africa and in Africa look at South Africa and say, that's where I need to go?
David Mohale, let me bring you back into the conversation then. You said we tend to think that politics is everything, and you would like us to focus more on the economy, which I believe we've done in this conversation. But you cannot throw away altogether the role of politics, given the governance requirements of our country's constitutional democracy. To what extent then does the politics itself need to be youthful? This conversation about, whenever the ANC sends out goodwill messages for one of its leaders who achieves a milestone in terms of their age, you see people commenting and saying that, the average, the median age is 28 in this country, but we are led by pensioners. Does that really matter in the bigger scheme of things of what we need to achieve?
Let me take advantage of where you started and perhaps disagree with my fellow panelists when they say that in law, youth are free. You quoted Mandela, and I'm not sure if my fellow panelists would have read Long Walk to Freedom. If they did, how many times? Actually, there's one poignant point that Mandela makes, that freedom is indivisible, which essentially means that you cannot claim to be politically free while other aspects of life are not freed. And the point I was trying to emphasize is the fact that politics is just an activity that can only be possible if, as a human being, you have taken care of the fundamental human needs, and those will be access to clean water, access to make sure that when you are unwell, you can go to clinic, you have clothing, you have shelter, etc., etc. And I'll also suggest that for those of us who are truly interested in development, perhaps we may also want to read the work of Amartya Sen, who has argued that development, who had argued that development is freedom. You cannot speak of freedom outside the context of development. And for instance, if we are told that a lot of young people, as a result of unemployment, are unable to marry and they find themselves in criminal activities, etc., as a result of exclusion, it is a result of the dysfunctional and degenerative economy. Be that as it may, you are correct. And as far as governance is concerned, politics does matter. And I did mention this in my introductory remarks, that the problem we are having is the fact that I think the generation that brought us political freedom in 1994 should honestly think about calling it quits. I think they've played their role. They've taken us thus far. I do not see a situation where they can be imaginative any further. But on the other hand, I think as young people who have been comfortable enough, precisely because we have just been happy with little things. If I wake up and I can go to a nightclub, I think that is the truest definition and epitome of development, and that is not. I do think that we need to start looking around and say, it could be that we may not be in a position to develop the next generation of Mandela and Tambo and Sisulu, but it's about time that we start to work consciously on that. So politics in the bigger scheme of development does matter. People have been unaccountable. Part of what we need to do as young people is to keep those in charge accountable. But it also means that we need to mobilize other young people to raise their hands and begin to take leadership responsibilities in society.
Yeah, because I must tell you, David, that, I don't know, for me, the whole idea of youth leagues in this day and age sounds to me like segmentation, as if youth are supposed to have those issues that just concern youth, as opposed to, youth being centered in all of these conversations and the leading of our country as far as governance is concerned. And I'll throw that to you, Dimpo, in just a moment and as we approach the closing. But Ravi, I wanted to pick up on a point that Dimpo made earlier on around, she mentioned among the many, things that hamstring the youth development, corruption. To what extent have we reckoned with that element, the cost of corruption to such aspects as youth employment?
Corruption in what sense? Do you mean?
Well, I mean, she was mentioning the impact that it has had, for example, in state-owned entities, that these are institutions that should
Yes. Look, so it would be important if we look at it from the point of view of having an impact on the state capacity, because if you want to deal with youth unemployment, you have to deal with a number of big issues, right? The structural issues which underpin the whole sort of ecosystem. So we need to have economic growth. And economic growth means we need to have ESCOM restructuring done so you can get electricity to businesses, otherwise they can't grow. We need the ports to be able to make sure all our exports can leave the border and reach their destination, otherwise businesses can't sell. We need ICASA to be able to provide the spectrum so everyone has good quality data and internet. If we don't get economic growth to go to actually increase by about 4%, we're not going to be able to create jobs for those 600,000 young people every year that come into the labor market. So to that extent that the state is not functioning well and those reforms aren't happening because of corruption or other state inefficiencies, not just, it's not just corruption, I think it's just state capacity, then that's a big number of jobs that we don't get. So and I suppose in terms of programs themselves, things like the implementation of SME programs and a whole range of things like that, probably it would be a big issue. But I think it's more state capacity and state failure and corruption that is a big issue impacting on youth jobs.
All right, let me try and squeeze in two comments from Dimpo Lecheu. The whole idea I was saying earlier on that I don't get it. Maybe it's just me, Dimpo. This whole idea of youth leagues and the sense that there's an allocation of spheres of influence that youth should be confined to. Am I bastardizing the role of youth leagues in today's politics, where we are saying that, the governance of the country and the scale and nature of the challenges requires that leadership should be agile and alive to the realities that young people face, yet we still have these, these structures politically. Am I bastardizing the problem?
So I think I agree with you to a certain extent, Tulasizwe, that youth leagues kind of, put young people in a corner to say, these are your issues, go and deal with them there as the youth league, instead of centering young people, I think, in the entire political process. But my understanding of youth leagues, and, by the way, Youth Lab is a non-partisan space, but my understanding of youth leagues is that they're supposed to train and equip and educate kind of the next generation of political leaders, right? So that you have a pipeline of young people who are coming out of these leagues who are then ready to take over from, the older generation as far as political leadership is concerned, as far as leadership positions in government and in government entities is concerned. And that hasn't been happening. What we've been seeing instead, with youth leagues over the past couple of years is that they've become a playground to fight certain political battles within, I think, some of the bigger parties. So I do think that the training of young people is important. And as far as political leadership, we do need young people in parliament. We do need young people in executive leadership, not just in government, at a municipal level, a provincial government level, a national level. Young people, need to be decision makers because they're going to experience the future that's being created now. And it simply does not make sense to have people who are making decisions now about a future that they're not going to fully participate in. So I think maybe youth leagues in that sense may still be relevant in terms of, just becoming like some kind of training hub for young people to be able to participate in political leadership. But I think more important than political leadership, or what we should be focusing on parallel to political leadership, is the extent to which young people participate in policy processes, which is a part of the work that we do at Youth Lab, right? It's to say there are bills and policies that are being drafted every day, but are we making space for young people to be heard, to make submissions, and to make meaningful input into not just how these policies are being drafted, but how they're being executed, right? Because you'll know that in South Africa, we have great policies, great plans, great initiatives, but there's a gap between those policies, the implementation, and the results that they yield. Yes, and so we need to bring more young people into the process of this, the process of the entire policy process, and that takes a lot of policy education as well.
All right, Dimpo, let's pause there for a moment. In a moment, when I come back, I'll be giving each one of my guests the opportunity to share with us their parting shots. You're watching Today here on eNCA.